So welcome to Tu Bishvat in Mesopotamia. This is a very unique perspective on Tu Bishvat, which is going to go beyond just the holiday of Tu Bishvat itself. It's going to be a perspective on the Jewish calendar and on the agricultural calendar and on issues that have to do with the ecology and trees and even dating systems for knowing how old certain ecosystems are in the world, which can reflect onto other things. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to this journey with you. Tu Bishvat, we call it Chag La'ilanot, and when we talk about Tu Bishvat in modern Israel, there are two things that we think about, usually, without any connection to the celebrating the anniversary of the Knesset, which is a big to-do online. But Tu Bishvat is a time for planting trees, and it's a time in which we eat the fruit of the land of Israel, which in recent years, it's become more of a thing to eat fresh fruit, but dried fruit is sort of the iconic thing. And we have an interesting connection between dried fruit and archaeology in the Israel Museum, as I'll soon express. So let's start with a little bit of background on the planting of trees. I'm sure you're familiar with the blue box. This blue box, the JNF or Keren Kayemet LeIsrael box, has been a staple in Jewish homes for over 100 years. People who want to donate to Israel donate in terms of building trees, in terms of planting trees. And that's very much in line with various midrashim that we have. Ki tavo el haaretz u'nita'atem kol etz ma'achal. Like when you come to Israel, the first thing you got to get busy doing is planting trees. So basically, planting trees is a connection to the land of Israel, even if you can't be there. So that's the first thing. And we have a family connection to the JNF. My family from Atlanta were very big donors to the JNF. And this picture on the right, which is hanging up in my parents' home, is trees that were planted in honor of my parents' wedding, which is 1983. So some of these trees out there in some forest in Israel have been planted by my great aunt and uncle, my late great aunt and uncle from Atlanta. And they do this for other family members. They even have a reservoir in the name of my uncle, Jack Hirsch. So basically, my family has deep connections to the land of Israel, even from abroad. With this. So that's a fun thing. The other thing that has to do with fruit, which I thought would be very fun to share with you, is the very first Tu Bishvat Seder that I've ever been to. Now, a Tu Bishvat Seder, you think of like a Pesach Seder, it has a certain kind of order to things. There's things you say, there's songs, right? What do you do on a Tu Bishvat Seder? Now, I was on several Tu Bishvat Sidarim since then. Some of them, like I was on one this week, two actually in a row. One of them where they basically divided the evening into four segments based on the four seasons, and they sang songs and they read poetry and stories and midrashim. Like, okay, it's very cute. This is a Syrian Tu Bishvat Seder, which I attended exactly 10 years ago in Brooklyn, in the house of well, I'll keep his name private. Some people recognize him. He's in the picture. This guy went to every big fruit store, produce store in Brooklyn and New York and bought a little bit of everything. I have never seen so much fruit in someone's house and such a variety. And it's not just solid fruit, it's also beverages that are made from those fruit, like pomegranate juice and beer and whiskey and fig arak. And boy, was that an evening. They read, this is a Syrian custom to read something associated with the Seret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, but there's a whole piece to it in Arabic, but written in Hebrew letters, so I was able to read it. So I read a piece. I had no idea what I was saying, but it was a lot of fun, and there was singing, and there's an order, a Kabbalistic order to the things that you eat, things that have a shell on the outside, that have a soft pit, a hard pit, all kinds of interesting things. So this was just an experiment, an experience I figured I would share with you. If you've ever been to a Tu Bishvat Seder like this, well, you know what I'm talking about. All right. Finally, before we go into the museum, the 7 species, Shiv'at HaMinim. Shiv'at HaMinim, all depicted here in the picture, are a major part in the Tu Bishvat Seder because these are the fruits which are the blessing of the land of Israel. Now, what is unique about these different fruits? There's a lot of discussion out there that like the people of Israel are compared to different aspects of, let's say, grapevines. Like you cut a vine and you can replant it again and again and again. So no matter how much trouble, how many bad things happen to us, we can keep on regrowing. Having mitzvot kerimot and olives, and so there's a lot of different things like tzaddik katama, like the palms are straight and they go up to the heavens and they have one heart. There are a lot of different things out there. But we like to do history and archaeology, and from a geographic perspective, historic perspective, Israel is located at a very unique location on the map because we have the climate of three different continents, right? We basically have the Alps and the Sahara and the rivers, right, all together. So we have a unique kind of land which is able to grow. It has the right conditions and the altitude and the sunlight and the water. We have the right conditions to grow all of these in different parts of the country, and that is unique. You usually have some of them, but not all of them unique to a particular region. Like the Greeks were excellent with grapes and olives, not so good at bread, even though they thought they were. Egypt is the worldwide mass production of grain because of the Nile, right? So they are the powerhouse, the breadbasket of the ancient Near East, and so on and so forth. So this is a very interesting thing I thought I'd mention. And with that, I would like to take us to the question of dried fruit and why do we use them today? So for that, we're going to go to our trusty Google Earth, which hopefully will be trusty and not crash on us again. So the Amazon forest. We started here, I figured, because Tu Bishvat in a more modern sense is centered around the ecology and trees and caring for nature. And we are going to talk about that. That's a very important connection. And usually we think about deforestation and human activity destroying the ecosystems and habitats of different animals and rainforests. So I wanted to show you one of the rainforests in question, the Amazon rainforest, one of the largest rainforests in the world. This is gigantic, right? We're talking in South America. Here's Suriname, Brazil. We have Ecuador, all these different countries around it. But here in the center is this huge, huge forest with areas that have not been inhabited by modern humans. There are people there who are still have barely seen the outside world. Anthropologists go to this place to study what our ancestors in the Stone Age lived like, because this is our closest representation. So this is the rainforest. But now let's go for a moment to the Israel Museum. The Israel Museum has an exhibition about the Canaanim, the Canaanites. You walk into the museum and you see this quote, "Ve'aknaani az ba'aretz," and the Canaanite was in the land. That is a quote from Lech Lecha. "Vayavor Avraham ba'aretz ad mekom Shechem ad Elon Moreh ve'aknaani az ba'aretz." So that is a direct quote from Avraham entering the land of Israel. We're talking around 3,800 years ago, a date we're going to revisit very soon. So here's the Canaanites. If you've ever driven up Highway 90 on the way to the Kinneret and passed through Beit She'an, there's a few roundabouts that you go through when you go through Beit She'an, and one of them has a model of these very lions, and that's because this was found in Beit She'an, but it's Canaanite. So that's kind of cool. We have the Canaanite capital from the time of Yehoshua, which is called Chatzor, which we hear about in the story of Dvorah and Sisera, which we just read in this past week's Haftorah, the story of the battle at Mount Tavor, right? And this is from Chatzor, Yavin Melech Chatzor. And we have the Canaanite business. The Canaanites were merchants. That's what the word Canaanite actually means. It means a merchant. The Canaanites were a coalition of, we'll call it, basically a conglomerate of several different nations, Chiti, Amori, Perizi, Yebusi, Girgashi, but they're all called Canaanites, which means merchants. And here's some of the things they were trading in from Egypt and from the area. They kind of copied the Egyptians, making these mummies. These mummies were found in Israel, near Gaza. And here are their boats. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Look at the content of the boats. There's a picture in the background, so I'll start with the picture. Based on different old drawings, but this is a reconstruction of a Canaanite ship. And it has the merchants on top, and they're carrying all kinds of goods, and they are stored here below. Now, here are the actual goods found in different excavations along the coast of Israel. So first, from left to right, we have anchors. So you see that the rope ties around it. There's a bit of an etching on it. You have to look really carefully, but you might be able to see it. That tells you that this is an anchor. See? Some kind of symbol. Looks a little similar to, Popeye's anchor that's tattooed onto his arm, but I don't really know if they're connected. We also have these pieces of bronze. Now, Tanya and Yoni, you were with me in the museum where we saw one of these hanging up on the wall, right? I think it's this one. They put this one on the wall, and then they're putting it back now because the exhibit of the feast closed. This is it's called an ox hide because of the shape, an ox hide ingot of copper, which was shipped from an island which is called Copper Island. The Greeks call it Copper Island. It's Kypros or Cyprus. In Tanakh, it's called Elisha, but that's the name they called it because that was their main export. And then we have the interesting thing. Look at this bubble that looks like the old sci-fi astronaut hats. Inside, the bubble is just covering the inside of a jar that was broken, but inside this jar, see if I can get a little closer without going through a wall. Inside this jar, if you look very closely, are dried figs. Dried figs in a circle. Now, dried figs in a circle, as you see in this modern plastic container, it was the way that you would naturally preserve them, dry them up, and ship them. It's just a very easy way to pack them, right? You'd even put a string through them, and that way you can even hang them in the marketplace. In the Mishnah and the Talmud, this is called igulei devela. Develim, devel is dried figs, and this is the way you would transport things. You would ship them, right? Now think of the advantage of this. It lasts for a very long time, right? It doesn't rot. In order to survive the ship, it has to be dry, unless people are going to eat it right away, but then it's not for export. Same thing with dried fish and salted meat, right? These are all techniques for preserving foods that would otherwise rot. All right. So that being said, why do we eat dried figs on Tu Bishvat? Where did that come from? So interestingly, the custom of eating fruit from the land of Israel, Shivat HaMinim, is really the origin. And because some of these fruits were not available, let's say in Poland, right, in different countries, they would import them from other countries or from Israel if they could, and that's how you would get them. You would get them dried. So in Chutz La'aretz, in the diaspora, the Jewish custom of eating fruit on Tu Bishvat was imported fruit because that's what you can get. But the truth is that now that we're back in Israel, there's really no purpose of maintaining that exile tradition because it was done because you didn't have access to it. But here you do. So why would you dry the fruit and ship it if you could just pick it off the tree, right? So that's the comeback of the Shivat HaMinim here in Israel today. So that was a little bit of a fun fact. Now let's talk about Tu Bishvat itself and go to Tu Bishvat in Mesopotamia and see what is the Tu Bishvat that was celebrated 3,800 years ago, which is not exactly the same Tu Bishvat, but it was still a significant date, and that itself is fascinating. So let's do a bit of an intro to Tu Bishvat to all be on the same page using archaeology and agriculture. So you'll recognize hopefully this familiar mosaic from the Beit Alpha synagogue, which has writing on the corners listing the names of the seasons called Tkufot. Tkufa is similar to the word hakafa because it's a cycle, right? The 4 seasons, and you have the zodiac, the signs in the center. This is basically the calendar. We'll see other ones as well, but this calendar was very, very common, different variations on the same theme in synagogues all over Israel in the Byzantine period. Now, in modern terms, we can look at the holiday cycle like this. You have the 4 seasons, and you have the months that we use today, and every month has its own holidays or agricultural or historic connections. Now, the Jewish calendar is let's just say the biblical calendar, okay? Let's put aside Tu Bishvat and Asara B'Tevet and Tisha B'Av and all those things. The holidays on the calendar in the Torah are a combination of historic events like leaving Egypt, receiving the Torah, right? It being intense in the encampments in the Midbar, like Chet HaEgel is Asara B'Tevet. Asara B'Tishrei is Yom Kippur is basically about the Chet HaEgel, right? But what about the agricultural ones? So the agricultural ones are Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, but we're putting aside their historic aspect, Chag HaAviv, Chag HaKatzil, and Chag HaAsif. So Chag HaAviv is the festival of spring, and the word Aviv literally means barley. That's when the barley is ripe in the field, which is usually a few months before the wheat, and that's Chag HaKatzir, which is Shavuot, is the festival where we bring the Shtei HaLechem, a special wheat offering in the temple. It's also called Chag HaBikurim because you bring Bikurim, you bring the first fruit of the land, and Chag HaAsif is the harvest festival when you gather everything that's left and then you move into the dormancy of the winter, right? So that's it. That's the agricultural calendar. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are not agricultural. They have other aspects, right? And that's it. Now let's get into Tu Bishvat. So the Mishnah, we all know in Rosh Hashanah, we've probably talked about this in previous tours, states as follows. As we know, Arba'a Rashei Shanim Hem. There are 4 separate beginnings to the year, each one for different sorts of holidays. So, or cycles, or commemorations, as we'll see. Be'echad b'Nisan, the first month of Nisan, which is the first month in the Torah, Chodesh HaRishon, Rosh Hashanah leMelachim ve'Largelim. That is the beginning of the year for kings and the holiday cycle. So Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, right? So L'Regalim is like people from Babylon or from Egypt during the temple would come and visit us in the temple. And there's certain things that you have one year, one holiday cycle to complete if you didn't do, or this and that, or to finish Ma'aser Sheni. Like there's all these different nuances, but you consider the holiday cycle as complete at the end of this cycle, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. So that's Nisan. Echad be'Elul, Rosh Hashanah leMa'asar behema. So on the first of Elul, which is the month before Tishrei, so before Rosh Hashanah, is Rosh Hashanah for counting how many sheep have been added to your flock in that year. Now, I happen to live right next to a sheep farm, and I can tell you that today it's a little bit different because we use hormones to make sure that the sheep can get pregnant outside of their natural cycle. But in their natural cycle, this is perhaps, at least in this region, it's the most natural period of time in which all the new babies will have been born, and now you can count them. Right? It's a little complicated today. Really, I'm curious how they would deal with that. But at the end of the day, it's an agricultural farming kind of cycle. The next two, Echad B'Tishrei, that's the one we all know, Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah is for years, right? So what Jewish year is it? Tafshin Pei Daled, that starts at Rosh Hashanah. Shemitah and Yovel, so the 7th year, the 50th year, that's how it's counted. And Niti'ah V'Yerakot, so vegetables, right? And Echad B'Shvat, the first of Shvat, is Rosh Hashanah La'ilan. That's the first of this month, is the beginning of counting the year for fruit of the trees. So let's say, practically speaking, there are mitzvot that you only keep in Israel, but let's say your tree is growing fruit, and it's the first year it's growing fruit, you can't eat them. Second, you can't eat them. Third, you can't eat them. On the 4th year, you can eat them with certain restrictions. And on the 5th year, they're considered to be, you can do whatever you want. Right. That being said, the marking of when a year for trees begins is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, and according to Beit Hillel, we follow the 15th of Shvat, Tu Bishvat. So it's an agricultural holiday, and the argument really has to do with understanding the climate in the land. Right. This isn't anything innate. It's not in the Torah. It's something that has to do with agriculture and understanding the cycle. Okay. So now let's just put those on our calendar. And I'm just placing them. Here are our 4 different beginnings of the year. Okay, different types of Rosh Hashanahs. Now we are ready to discuss Tu Bishvat in Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia, I'm sure we're all familiar, is this area which is kind of green between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Prat and the Hidekel. The part that looks more obviously green is known in ancient times as Sumer, and the area above Babylon, which is also between the rivers, is known historically as Akkad, like Akkadian, right? And all the way here on the top where they meet is give or take modern day Turkey. Haran is up here, Aram Naharaim, the 2 rivers, right? That's all up here. And our story with Avraham begins here. You of course heard the story of the city of Ur Kasdim. This is where Avraham was born. We found ziggurats there, these stairways to heaven, as they're called. We know of about 40 of them. I've seen pictures of 4. So there's an Ur in Larsa, in Babylon, and in Uruk or Erech, but there are more of them. So this was a phenomenon at the time. We're going back to the time of Avraham, 3,800 years ago, to a city in the neighborhood of Avraham and Sumer called Elasar in the Torah. Arioch Melech Elasar, you remember from the story of Avraham's battle with the different kings. Kedar Laomer Melech Elam. Elam is right over here in modern Iran. This is Elam, and this is Elasar or Larsa. Same letters. You can see the game. So what exactly did we find here, and what does it have to do with Tu Bishvat? So, in the kingdom of Sumer, where we have these ziggurats, we have found archives with cuneiform documents, which, thanks to the Persians, we're right around the corner from Purim, the Persians who wrote everything in multilingual inscriptions, they basically opened up access to the world to be able to read cuneiform and Sumerian because they wrote everything in so many different languages. So that's a story for our later tours about Purim. But in the kingdom of Sumer, we know about a festival called the 15th of Shabbatu. Now, this is a photograph I took of an exhibition in the Bible Lands Museum. I put the credit down below. In a special exhibition which talks about Tu Bishvat in Mesopotamia, in the city of Larsa from the time of Avraham Avinu, basically across the street from Avraham's hometown. Okay, what exactly are they doing in Larsa in the time of Avraham on Tu Bishvat? So there's a few things to unpack there. There's the name of the month, there's the date itself, and then there's what exactly did they do, which is really fascinating. So let's first talk about what they did. On Tu Bishvat, they would go up to the roofs of their temples and look into the horizon, trying to find the planet, or what they thought was a star, Venus. That's what they were looking for. Now, how did they know what they knew? You have to consider 2 things. Number 1, no electricity. Very, very good visuals. Number 2, no Netflix. So they don't keep themselves busy watching movies. They actually observe the night sky, and they notice changes in the position of the constellations and the star. I mean, they invented the constellations, but basically the stars and the moon and the sunlight at different times of the year, they're at different locations over that hill instead of this hill, and they started charting these things down and making calculations. So this observation enabled them to know a lot of different things. And now let's talk about the planet Venus. So the planet Venus, named after the Roman goddess Venus, is actually a planet, of course, but the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and the ancient Babylonians and Sumerians and all believed that they didn't know about planets. It was stars as far as they're concerned. They believed that those are actually the gods. The gods are these stars in heaven. We mentioned this in our previous tour about idolatry. They didn't believe that the statues that they built were actually alive. What they believed is that they would enable them somehow to communicate with the stars, like a transistor, if you will. and that they would be able to get the God's attention down on earth. So they saw this very bright star, which in Hebrew we call Noga, which means glowing. The Romans called it Venus. The Greeks called it Aphrodite. It's the same goddess. That's her symbol. It's also a symbol of femininity because it's the goddess of fertility and beauty and so on. And the Sumerians called it Ninsiana. Ninsiana is the daughter of the moon god, who is a he, and he is she, Sin. Like the name Sancheriv is Senacheriv. Sin is the moon god. The sun god was called Shamash, by the way. Similar language to Hebrew. It's a Semitic. It sounds Semitic, at least that name. So they would observe the night skies and look out for the planet Venus. Now, why was that important for them? Simply because they knew from astronomical observation and an experience of the agricultural cycle that if they saw the planet Venus, the winter is nearing its end and the new year is about to begin. But if they didn't see the planet Venus, what they would understand is that the winter is going to be a little bit longer. Think of the groundhog, right? Something like that. If they didn't see the planet Venus, then they knew that Nisan is going to be in a while. So listen to this. They added an extra month. They didn't call it Adar Aleph, Adar Bet. They called Adaru was the 11th month. They gave it a different, long, complicated name. I keep forgetting what it is. But they called it another name, and they added another month in order to extend the winter so that Nisan begins in the spring. Now, that itself raises eyebrows because that's what we do. If we understand that the winter is going to be longer, and of course now the calendar is fixed, so we take it for granted that at just about an average every 3 years, it's a leap year and we add another month. But the truth is that we do that so that Pesach will be in the spring, B'chodesh Ha'aviv. It's the parshas we're reading now, right? So they would do a very similar thing. But what were they doing on Tisha B'Av? Sorry, Tu Bishvat. What were they doing on Tu Bishvat? Well, they besides this observation, they would bring special offerings and prayers, and they had an 8-day holiday on the 15th of the month. Does that sound similar? An 8-day holiday, or let's say 7 days with an added 8th day, which does something unique on the 15th of the month, right? We have that on Pesach, right? We have the 7 days of Pesach, and then we have Sfirat HaOmer, and then the final day is Atzeret, so you don't really associate it with the 8th day. But on Sukkot, which is on the 15th of Tishrei, we have Shmini Atzeret. Shavuot is also called Atzeret, except there's a Chol HaMoed, so to speak, a prolonged Chol HaMoed of 7 weeks in between, but that's a topic for another conversation. The point is, 15th of the month, agricultural holiday, 7 days, and then an 8th day. In Sumer, what they did on the 7 days is each day was dedicated to a different god or goddess of the Sumerian pantheon. And on the 8th day, they would have a special celebration with the king, in this case, Sin Idinam, which means like, the Lord by power of sin, which is the moon god, nothing to do with primal sin. So it's a really cool thing. And I'd like to summarize what this means before we move on to say as follows. When we have agricultural holidays at the middle of the month, and it's very similar to holidays that existed in the ancient world, that should show us that the Torah does not exist in a vacuum, but rather it is using existing things that are usually associated with idolatry and redirecting them in a different direction. It's not inventing something out of nowhere. It's introducing new concepts of morality, of monotheism. That's fine. But an agricultural holiday in the 15th of the month with 8 days was not invented in the Torah. It existed before, and we're using that and redirecting it in a different direction. So that is a very interesting point. The next one is the day of the month. So on the 15th of the month, even without having My Zmanim calendar or any other app, it's the 15th of the month because you see the new moon. It's objectively visible. And it's even interesting that the word for month is yerach, right? As we'll see in the names of the month. Or in Arabic, it's sahar, and sahar means the crescent, right? Means the moon. Even the word, the modern Hebrew word for month, chodesh, comes from chidush, from renewal, because the month is a cycle of birth and renewal of the moon. So that is a very profound idea. And of course, we have a combination of solar calendar as well, and an exact calculation of the rebirth of the moon that's called Sod HaIbur. Like, the Jewish calendar is very sophisticated in this sense, but it's important to see that the units of time that governed most cultures in the world have to do with the moon, right? Some have the sun only, some have a combination of the two, or only one, right? We have a combination of the two, and we adjust it like it's a very, again, it's a sophisticated calendar. But that being said, it's really cool to see these different things. Now the names of the month, I just want to mention quickly. Remember the Ein Gedi mosaic that we saw earlier on, which has the zodiac on it, and it has the names of the month listed. So let's talk about the names of the month. We are a little bit surprised when we hear that they celebrated Tu Bishvat in Mesopotamia, but for a number of reasons, as we mentioned, what they did in Tu Bishvat, adding another Adar, the fact that Nisan is the beginning of the year, and it's the 15th of the month, and the name of the month. But the truth is, as we know, that these names of the month that we use do not show up anywhere in the Torah. They show up in Tanakh towards the very, very end, when we've already come back from Babylon, from Mesopotamia. We brought a lot of things back with us from Mesopotamia, like the shape of these letters, called Ashurit, which Assyria, is really a general name for Mesopotamia. Because when we call it Ktav Ashuri, the Assyrians are long gone. When we come back to Israel with Cyrus the Great, they're long gone. Eretz Ashur, you know the song, Uva Uvdim Eretz Ashur. Eretz Ashur means Mesopotamia. Okay, even though Yeshayahu says that, and he lives during the height of the Assyrian Empire. But anyway, Ashur means Mesopotamia. So these are the months that we brought with us from Babylon. Now, I just want to point out one cool thing, and that is the name for Cheshvan, Mar Cheshvan. Mar Cheshvan, in modern Hebrew, we like to play with it. We call it Cheshvan. We call it Mar Cheshvan. It's Mr. Cheshvan for you, or rather, bitter Cheshvan, because there are no holidays on it, right? That's the kind of things that we say. But it's very interesting that in the Sumerian language, Marach Sheman, it means Yareach, like moon or month, Shmone, the 8th month, right? Because it's number 8. Right? That's really, really cool. Marach Shman is Marach Cheshvan, Yareach Shmini. So it's a cool thing when you realize where the names come from. The names in the Torah, of course, are these ones, which is simply the numbers. So that concludes the first part of the Torah. The next part is going to be a little bit faster, but it's going to be about trees and the ecology and human responsibility for the planet. Some really cool stuff, including Night in the Museum. Hopefully you've heard of the movie if you've not seen it. I know the kids have definitely seen it. So let's transition now to talk about trees. We're going to go visit some really cool places around the world. So we have this famous saying. I'm sure you've heard it. I'm sure you've seen it. Ki ha'adam etz hasadeh. The human being, Adam, is compared to the tree of the field. This verse is, of course, once we see the source, as we will later, is taken out of its context. In other words, it's a midrash. In its simple meaning, it means actually the opposite of what it says there, which we'll get to later. But for now, let's just take it at face value. Humanity is like the tree of the field. Now let's think about what that means. Like, what is it about the trees that makes them stand out, no pun intended, from the rest of the plant world or plant kingdom? And how is that similar to human beings? So there's a lot to unpack here. We can talk about symbiosis. We can talk about oxygen and carbohydrate and carbon dioxide, that we breathe one and exhale the other, and they do the opposite, right? We can talk about that. But in the simplest level, the trees grow up really, really high. They stand up. And human beings are basically the only animal that stands up. And in many ways, in terms of the human being's ability to manipulate nature and understand it on a much higher level than any animal, and the fact is that we've developed science and technology and no animal has, they can use basic tools, but they don't have the capability to develop science and technology, right? Humanity are the kings of the animal kingdom. I know we like to say the lion is the king, but human beings hunt lions, right? Lions can kill humans, but we have better weapons, and we protect the ecosystems of the savannas, right? Like, we look out for nature. Trees look out for the world. So there's a lot of interesting parallels there, which might have to do with pumas on socks. I'm not really sure what Yoni's trying to say there. Okay, so you're just doing your laundry. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about trees. So I'd like to share with you two, basically, you can say world records, Guinness records, if you will. The world's tallest tree and the currently living oldest tree. So the world's tallest tree. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the picture, right? The tallest tree in the world is the sequoia, right? 1 second, let's zoom out a little bit so we don't get dizzy. The sequoias. Those of you who are familiar, there's in Malach HaMisha, there's a wedding hall called Sequoia because they happen to have a sequoia in the hotel. It's nowhere as large as the sequoias that are hundreds of years old in California. So we're in the West Coast where you have the perfect climate and altitude for the ongoing growth over centuries for the largest, or let's say tallest and oldest trees currently found in the world. The Giant Forest Museum, here are the sequoia or redwood trees right here in California. And then right near us, it looks near, it's a little bit far, this is Nevada. You have the oldest living trees in the world. We'll visit both and we'll see how old and how tall they are. So let's start with the giant trees. Okay. By the way, has anyone here been to the sequoia trees? I haven't. I'm just curious. Okay. So, I'm the museum guy, so I had to. The Giant Forest Museum. It's a visitor center. You can run around, see all kinds of stuff. Different trees there. Some of them even have names. Like this one is called Sentinel. We'll see a few of their names. It's a little bit hard to grasp how big they are, and I haven't been here, but I've heard from people who have, and they say even with the pictures, it just doesn't do it. You stand next to these trees, and you just feel small, really, really small. So here's our giant trees, and it's quite fascinating. So I'd like to show you a few different things. First of all, in this trail, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trees. It's the forest. I don't know the exact size, but it's probably bigger than the state of Israel. So it's a big forest. I'm not really sure how large it is. In different parts of the forest, they used to chop down trees up to like 100 years ago or so. So unfortunately, there are a lot of trees that were chopped down. I mean, for wood, wood and timber. That's now, of course, the trees are protected today. We don't do that today. But you get a sense of the power of the trees. There's a lot of them have been cut down. Okay. The tallest tree until recently in the world is called General Sherman. There's also General Grant right next to him. General Sherman, it's so big, it has a name. General Sherman is the tallest tree until recently. They recently discovered one that's a little bit taller. I'll get to that in a moment. It's really tall. How tall is General Sherman? Let me give you a comparison. It is 3 blue whales stretched from tail to nose, one after the other. 3 blue whales, or the height of the Statue of Liberty, right? 93 meters, if I remember correctly. 93 meters is the height of the sequoia tree. And by the way, the word sequoia is the name of a Native American Indian who developed a writing system for their language. So it's a name of a person, sequoia. So that is sequoia. Now, when you think about the role of humanity as supposedly towering over the rest of the animal world and his ability to dominate the world, and yet we are very, very small when we look at the trees. And the trees have been here for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. I mean, trees, in terms of evolution, trees have predated humanity, right? Like you read in the Torah, plants come before biological life. So let's say animal life, fish, and all that stuff. So anyway, trees are very, very ancient and impressive. So these are the redwood trees. Now, what is the oldest tree alive today? I just want to mention really quickly that recently they've discovered, apparently they've discovered another tree in the redwood forest, which is a few meters taller than General Sherman. It's like 96 meters, but its location is kept a secret. And apparently, if you get near it, you could pay a fine of up to $5,000 or $6,000 and go to jail for half a year. So no TikTokers or Instagrammers will get near it to try to do some nonsense or shenanigans, right? So protect the trees. Now let's talk about the oldest trees alive. How do we know how old a tree is? Well, there's a hint in this picture, of course, tree rings, right? There's actually a dating method for dating trees, which is called dendrochronology. I'll, of course, links to all this stuff in the video description. Dendro means like inside, dentro. So dendrochronology means dating things based on their inside, and it's a unique field because it tells you a lot about the composition of each tree ring, as we'll see. So, but the way we know the age of trees is by their tree rings. Now, you might ask, so wait a minute, how do you know what the oldest tree alive is without cutting it down? Simply, you drill a hole into it and pull out a core. And when you pull out that core, you could look at the different rings. So that's and the tree heals. So that's fine. I wouldn't want to be the tree being drilled into, but overall, it's considered fine. Now, here's the cool thing about dendrochronology. Looks like I didn't switch it to the English here because I did this in Hebrew as well, but that's all right. So in the field of dendrochronology, if you're limiting yourself to one particular habitat, like one particular forest, and you find an old tree that has, say, let's just draw this to make it a little bit easier. Okay, let me find it here. I'll do this in yellow. Okay, so let's say this tree that was chopped down 10 years ago has 300 rings. So it's 300 years old, right? And you know exactly when it began because you cut it down 10 years ago, right? So you know exactly when it's from. And then you take an older tree that was cut down earlier, or there's different ways to figure this out. You can actually tell by the composition of the tree rings what year is what ring once you have one that you can date, because each ring is different. Each ring reflects the nutrients that it absorbed, the sunlight. Sometimes you can see scars from a burning or fungi. You can tell a lot about the ecology, what was going on in the forest when this tree was growing. So you can actually find like a fingerprint of different rings, and especially when you see like 30 of them together, you know this is those years. So you're now able to sort of overlap these tree cores and move backwards in time to understand what was going on in this forest 500 years ago, 600 years ago. Like you just keep on going back and back and back using this overlap. Now, this can be a very surprising thing, and I know that for some people it can be a little bit upsetting if there's no framework for how to look at these questions. But if you stack up certain trees in different tree rings in different forests in the world, you can go back more than 10,000 years of direct connection between one tree overlapping over the other. Now, I'm not getting into the whole dating of the world question. I think that's sort of a very outdated question. We have other ways for looking at the Torah, not taking the dating part literally and, take it or leave it. I'm not getting into that right now, but there's enough sources to rely on that and enough to get into that conversation right now. I'm happy to send references later. But anyway, this is a really, really cool thing. So that being said, we can now say with certainty how old a tree is. And here's where it gets really, really cool. So the oldest living tree ever documented is called Prometheus. and it is from Nevada. It's from the forest that I'm going to take you there in a few moments. Now, it was unfortunately cut down in the 1800s, so we know exactly when it was cut down. And then you just move backwards in the tree rings, and it grows in a very funny way. So you need to look at the tree rings very carefully. Now, I'll tell you soon how old Prometheus was when it was cut down. You can still visit it in the museum, as we'll see. But who was Prometheus? So you got to know your Greek mythology, especially you Percy Jackson fans. Kronos, the Titans, Kronos, Hyperion, Prometheus, right? There are different of the Titans, the creator gods in the Greek mythology, and Prometheus, from the creators of humankind, wanted to give them the gift of fire. So he brought them fire from Mount Olympus. Now, Zeus was not happy with that because Zeus wanted to destroy everything. And so he punished Prometheus by chaining him to the mountain, and the eagles ate his liver in an endless cycle again and again and again. Think like Sisyphus, right? You roll up the stone and it falls back down. So that's Prometheus. Now, why am I showing you this particular statue of Prometheus from the Louvre? Because look at its shape. It looks just like Prometheus. Prometheus looked like this before it was cut down. This is what these specific trees look like. And let's go and actually meet them in their natural habitat. So we are moving from California. See ya. We're going to Nevada. The bristlecone pines, that's what those trees are called, grow in this forest, which is high up. It has actually snowy peaks, and it's a very, very large forest. And in this forest, you have these pine trees, these bristlecone pines, tiny, tiny little pine cones, kind of cool. And in here this is the birthplace of Prometheus. But Prometheus was cut down almost 200 years ago. Who is the oldest living tree today? So let's go to the visitor center and follow that question. The visitor center shows you the pine trees. These are like regular pines, not the cool bristlecone ones. And inside the visitor center, I couldn't get a better picture than the one I showed you, is the tree stump of Prometheus. And you can actually study him, and there's a museum with all kinds of cool stuff. This you can find their website online. I'll link it in the video. And here there is currently a living tree, a living bristlecone tree, bristle pine, oh my gosh, I get confused, bristlecone pine tree called Methuselah, who lived 969 years, right? So it's like the really, really old guy from Tanakh, Methuselah. Now let's go to the place where Methuselah is. So Methuselah is, we don't actually know exactly where he is, because for the same reason as the large trees in California, his exact location is kept secret to protect him from Instagrammers and influencers and TikTokers and all kinds of shenanigans. So his location is kept secret. He looks like thousands of other bristlecone pines, so it's hard to tell who he is. This trail, which you could travel, is called the Methuselah Trail. So you go around looking for Methuselah, looking to find him. It's a great trail, right? And this is a huge forest. It's not like forests in Israel, right? Somewhere here is Methuselah. Now, to be more specific, Methuselah is somewhere around the Wheeler Pink mountain, right around here somewhere. But it's really hard to find out where he is because, again, his location is kept secret. Let's see if we get lucky. I don't think we'll find him, but, well, just lots of pine trees. Oh, well, I thought I'd find something exciting, more exciting than that here. Anyway, so how old is Prometheus? How old is Methuselah? Let's take a look. So, the third place of the oldest trees in the world is Methuselah. He is currently, as we speak, 4,852 years old and growing. Prometheus died at 4,900 years old, so he was older than Methuselah, and had he still been alive, he'd be over 5,000 years. The winner is an unknown tree. Again, its location is hidden, but it looks like this, which is 5,065 years. Again, they drilled a hole into it, so they know how old it is. This is quite incredible. These trees are older than the pyramids of Egypt. The pyramids would theoretically have to bring them a birthday gift when they were just built, because they're really, really old trees. So this idea should give us a little bit of humility when approaching trees. You don't just chop down a tree. I mean, the tree is history. It's the ecology. It's the ecosystem. It's like the guardians of the earth. It's like you don't just chop down trees. And that's something that we appreciate very much. Now, here's where I want to take us to almost our final stop, but we have a little bit of a surprise at the end. I'm sure you've heard of this movie, Night in the Museum. This is the sequel. We have to go to the British Museum. I love this movie because it's happening in the Natural History Museum, and that's where we are going to go. Right next to Ben Stiller, the actor here on his left, on our right is Robin Williams, portraying Theodore Roosevelt. And that's our next stop, the Natural History Museum. We're going to continue our story. Here we are, Central Park. So the American Museum of Natural History, which has tree rings from the sequoia, but most importantly to our conversation is Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. So here he is on his horse. Unfortunately, today he's no longer there because, well, basically, I'm not getting into the politics, but he was taken down. But he's still inside the museum. So Teddy Roosevelt is outside. I think this is actually a new statue of some sort that they put up here. But Teddy Roosevelt was on his horse outside. And inside the museum is the Teddy Roosevelt Memorial, which you're looking at right here. So there's Teddy. Theodore Roosevelt, America's 26th president, who was around 1903, give or take. And there's several different areas here that we're going to jump into. To the right, that's the Hall of Planet Earth. And to the left, there is the Hall of Biodiversity. So let's jump into there and see a little bit more. So this is from Night in the Museum. I had to just mention it. This is the scene, Teddy Roosevelt on his horse. So we get all the fun stuff in it's a great movie. And now I'm sitting here with Teddy Roosevelt as a couple years ago when I visit the Natural History Museum. So now let's go in to the museum. Okay, first of all, the Hall of Planet Earth, and then biodiversity. The Hall of Planet Earth is very exciting because it talks about planetary formation and the inner crust and lava and minerals and materials of the planet, and it shows how the planet was formed. So how are planets made, and the lava and the this and the that. It's really, really cool stuff. You could spend hours here. Now, off to the side here is a small display with an ice core from one of the icicles around the world, is an ice core. Very similar to tree rings. Every single year, there is another layer of ice. Now, you could sort of tell what's summer, what's winter. I'm not an expert on this, but you could tell. And this screen here enables you to slide along this ice core, which is extracted, of course, in very careful conditions, because if it melts, you're screwed, right? You need it to all stay, all the pollen that got stuck in the ashes from an old earthquake that lay down there. You can date earthquakes. I mean, you can do eruptions of volcanoes. That is, you can tell a lot of different things about the world going through ancient layers of ice. Now, the cool thing about this is that with some ice areas, you could drill down a kilometer of ice layers and get to over 100,000 years backwards in time. It is really incredible. You could learn about the ecology, you could learn about the environment. And that's why this ice core is right here in a place talking about the atmosphere and the ozone layer and the impact of different things on the environment, right? And what we know through ice cores. So this is a really, really hardcore, no pun intended, exhibit, worthwhile visiting to understand the development of our planet and the impact of different natural phenomena on how the planet grows. So this is a cool thing. Now let's jump across the hall. And we're almost done. The Hall of Biodiversity. It sounds like a buzzword today, but it's not. Biodiversity is all about the plant life and the animal life. So fungi, flowers. Here's that big flower that smells like rotten meat, right? To attract flies. There's a big cacti, and there's all these different kinds of things. I mean, again, you can spend hours here. In the movie Night in the Museum, the guard sort of opens this door by accident, and the big whale sort of squirts at him, and then he closes the door. This is the great blue whale, right? So that's inside this room. I took some pictures in here too, but it's a little bit less relevant for today. But just for making a point, you know what? I'll show it to you later. Okay, and finally, the forests in the United States. So fear not, this isn't a real mosquito. This is 36,000 times larger than life size, but it's talking about the ecosystems in the different forests in the United States. And of course, there is a special section dedicated towards the great trees, the redwood forest. And here it is. So this is an actual redwood. This is a sequoia, right? And we'll look at that in just a moment. I'd like you to see this display across it, which shows you some of the science of dendrochronology about how you can understand what different tree rings mean based on how they're built. So it's a whole field of study. It's really, really fascinating. You can see there was a fire at a particular time, and you see it all over the trees, and you see how the trees sort of grew over the scab, and there was drought, and here there were windstorms, and it's a very complex story as this tells you. The fascinating thing about it, of course, is the age. Look at the size of that thing, in the words of Han Solo when he sees the Death Star for the first time. So let me show you the sequoia. I took a few pictures up close. So first of all, Theodore Roosevelt himself drove through the sequoias, as we see in this picture. That's just in the Hall of Biodiversity. And here is the great sequoia. On the left is in the Hall of Minerals and Gems. That's a fossilized tree. But here on the right, I took this a while ago. Here's the actual tree. The tree began in the year 556 or 560, something like that, 580, 560. So it's from the time of those mosaics we saw in the beginning, from the Byzantine period. This tree was cut down in 1891. It's about 1,300 years old. Now, just imagine if the tree could speak, what different things happened during its time. I mean, you just look at the dates here. Look, the year 1200, that's the Rambam, right? You look at 1400 to 1500, that's the Spanish expulsion. 1800, that's like the Ottoman Empire in Israel. You look at 700, that's the time of the Gaonim. 600, that's the Gemara. And this tree is standing and growing and growing and growing. Think of the nerve to chop down a tree, that's been through so much. It's like the guardian of the earth. It's a noble thing, trees like this. So that's just something to think about in terms of the tree. Now I want to wrap this idea up and go back to the idea of trees as, you can say, the sort of guardians of nature in a sense. So two pieces of artwork, I found a lot of them, but these are two that stood out to me that I found on Pinterest. I linked the name of the artist below, and I can add that in the video description. So was this Rebecca Clark art? She shows a tree rings, but the bark around it is the forest, is the ecosystem, because the tree is it's a live thing, right? The other one, which is really cool, this is not me, I just found this on Pinterest. So it looks like a cross section of a tree, but if you look at it up close, the tree rings are the circle of life, our nature, our animals, right? So the tree is alive. It's a beautiful expression. So we have a bit of a surprise in the end, which comes back to Israel. But before we do that, let's just wrap up this conversation about trees. Oh, here's the surprise. I guess we'll start with this, and then we'll do the wrapping up. So These are date pits that were found on this site, which I sure hope you recognize, right? It's Masada. So let's go back there, and that's where our final point is going to be. So here in Masada, in the 1960s, Yigael Yadin is digging, and when he's digging here in Masada, he finds date pits. Now, these date pits are from the destruction layer. They're from the Second Temple destruction period, okay, here in Masada. So he found them here. They were kept in the lab, and you can say almost miraculously, they were able to revive them in the lab and plant them again. And out of these date pits, they grew a tree they called Methuselah. Methuselah is in Kibbutz Ketura in the Negev. I'll show you where it is. The tree was planted in 2011, and since it was planted, it's had a bar mitzvah. Not really sure what it read, but it is in Kibbutz Ketura. Let me show you where that is. On the way to Eilat. Here's the kibbutz, and somewhere here in the kibbutz is Methuselah. All you have to do is go to the kibbutz, and they will point you in the right direction. I've never been, but there's videos about this online. There's tours about there. So somewhere here in Kibbutz Ketura in the Negev is Methuselah. Keep on wondering if I'll be able to find him, but good luck. There's a lot of palm trees here, and I don't know when this picture was taken. Anyway, so that was Methuselah, our Methuselah, not the oldest tree in the world, Methuselah, but rather a Methuselah, which is a very old date pit that was revived. So that's a really, really fascinating thing. Now let's wrap up our conversation about trees. So Adam etz hasadeh, humanity is the tree of the field. The full context of this verse in Dvarim is about laying siege on a city. There's the lumberjack. He's wearing my shirt. If you are besieging another city that you're fighting in order to capture it, do not lift your axe onto the tree to chop it down, because you eat from it. So don't cut it down. Are you considering the tree to be a human who you have war against? Like, leave the tree alone. Hey, lumberjacks, leave the trees alone. Now, it's as a question. We turn that around in terms of a midrash, and we say ha'adam etz hasadeh. But in the simple meaning, it means no, humanity is not the tree. Leave the trees alone. And it's talking about fruit trees, right? Rak etz asher teda ki lo etz ma'achalu. Any tree that is not a fruit tree, those are the trees you are permitted to cut down in order to build whatever you need to take down the city you're fighting against. So that's the context of being very careful not to destroy fruit trees. If you need to cut down a tree, but don't cut down a fruit tree. The final midrash, which I think is a fascinating one, is one about Adam Harishon. So there's a verse in Kohelet which says, look at the deeds of the Lord. Who could possibly correct or fix that which was warped or broken? Now, the midrash on that, it's one of those weird midrashim, outlandish midrashim, that for centuries could not have possibly been understood as literally. Could not have been understood literally, right? And today we live in a world in which it is the simple meaning. There are a few of those. It's really, really fascinating. So it goes like this. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and then paraphrase it in English. B'sha'ah shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu et Adam Harishon, when the Almighty, blessed be He, created the first human. Netalo v'hechaziro al kol ilanei Gan Eden. He came and showed him around all the trees in the Garden of Eden, and he said to him, V'amar lo, Re'eh ma'asai, kama na'im u'meshubachim, and look how beautiful are my deeds, how praiseworthy they are. V'chol ma shebarati bishvilcha barati. Everything that I created for you. Ten da'atecha shelo tekalkel v'tachariv et olami, she'im kilkalta en mi she'itaken acharecha. Be mindful not to destroy and ruin my world, because if you destroy it, there is nobody to come after you and clean up your mess. Now, you think about what this midrash meant. This is it. We're done. Okay? You think about what this midrash meant to anybody a mere 100 or even 50 years ago. It's a spiritual sense, like don't cause damage that will lead to the destruction of the world. Like, what does it mean? It's a metaphor of some sort. Today, it is headlines. People are talking about whether you're talking about climate change, global warming, whether you think that that's alarmist, the science is still out there. The bottom line is we understand that we need to be careful with our actions to not pollute the rivers, to not to cut down the trees, to not destroy the ecosystem and the ozone layer and the environment. These are things that we understand that human beings have the capability to do. And if we destroy this planet, there is nobody who will come and fix it after us, unless, of course, you create a robot called Wall-E and you leave it there to clean up your mess after you go into outer space and just become overweight and forget how to use your feet, right? It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's a great parody on today's world. People are looking at their screens all the time. They don't even know there's a swimming pool next door because they're just glued to their screens. So it's a great parody, but it's also a great movie. That is our tour for beginning with Tu Bishvat, Mesopotamia, the Jewish year, the calendar, the months, the agriculture, down to the oldest and tallest trees, and finally to a message about our responsibility as custodians of this planet to take care of it and preserve it and to make sure that it is not destroyed, because we are responsible for our planet. Thank you very much for joining.